In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. I am really looking forward to diving in with today's guest. He has roots in the military and studied at West Point, which helped inspire his first entrepreneurial venture. He has since founded, led, and exited subsequent ventures, and currently runs a company that's doing amazing work in technology modernization and digital transformation. He was also previously a leader at the analyst firm Forrester Research, where he and I first had the pleasure of working together. He is the president and CEO of HQ Engineered. Mark Hewitt, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to see you again, Natalie.
Great to have you here. And I'm really looking forward to today's conversation and unpacking some of your experience and expertise, especially around digital transformation. And so I wanted to start off by asking you, what is the biggest misconception out there about driving major change in an organization?
Yeah, I think, the biggest misconception is really revolves around if change is mandated from the top down, it's really not going to be embraced. And where, the real value in that comes from is when there's a collective effort that equates input from the team, transparency and flexibility, rather than the hierarchical top-down directive. And to put some more teeth on that, realistically, engaging as a inclusive leadership philosophy that then empowers people at all levels of the organization to take part in the change is really critical and important. I think having clear communications of why the change is occurring and how it's going to be enacted comprehensively is also a level of transparency that's required. And then enabling sort of the flexibility and being open to feedback, because I think as we've all experienced, things change. Upon first contact, the plan goes out the window. But, in large part, I feel that being responsive to the feedback of the teams and adjusting the strategy as needed is really the recipe for success in large change in organizations.
Yeah, that's great. And I wanted to go into a little bit more of some of what you said there. First would be really, inclusive leadership. So what does that mean to you and kind of how do you go about that?
Yeah, I think the reality of that is people need to roll their sleeves up and not sit on the sidelines. It's having the executives in meetings or the managers and directors in meetings with their sleeves rolled up to engage and take part, and frankly, probably to learn from peers and folks that might be on their teams. I think in today's world, everyone's, learning how that they themselves learn best. And so everybody has something to offer, particularly as we look at new things like, generative AI is sort of the hype currently, right? And I just came off a call just as an anecdote. And in the course of the call, you recognize that we have patterns that we try to follow, but the client actually knew the use cases and the things that were important to them. And this was a marketing use case. Stakeholder, a chief marketing and communications officer, and she really knew her business best. And so it really spurred, I think, applying both our expertise to their problem that will lead to the largest result. So that's what I mean in terms of engaging early, communicate the why and the how that you're trying to achieve things, prioritize those and be flexible to changes as you go through. And so this was an input to what is going to be a larger group discussion. And I think it made it a lot more fruitful, both for us and I think for her team eventually that we're going to be engaging with.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and I think whether it's kind of internal, like you said, the executive team, leadership team to the rest of the staff and organization, or kind of a client and a kind of partner vendor type of dynamic that kind of emphasizes needing to get those different perspectives from the people kind of in it day to day. And then the experts that can provide that overlay of, like, in the case of your Gen AI example, what can the technology do and how to kind of think about building out kind of those competencies and the technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm can empathize with what you said about, learning how we learn best. And speaking from personal experience, I know that's something that Gen AI has actually underscored for me, because you do have the ability to kind of take in information differently, analyze larger amounts of content differently. I'm curious if you've had that experience either kind of with your team, with your clients, or yourself personally, like that kind of how do we learn best?
Yeah. So, we definitely have a training budget for everyone, and some buy textbooks, and very much in an academic setting still in some contexts. Others will use Udemy Pluralsight. Other folks. I'm taking a class at MIT on quantum computing from October to December, so a little bit different kind of venue. Others might take actual college classes or go to third party events like ODSC or even Forrester or Gartner types of conferences to validate understanding, maybe do some workshops. So I like to let people learn how they learn. But inherent in that is they actually know how they're going to absorb that information. My only ask to everyone is that they then turn around and share that with ourselves and our teams and our clients and sort of the community generally.
Yeah, yeah. It's great that you have that kind of flexibility, because people do really learn differently and also have different needs of kind of what are the soft or technical skills of the role that they're looking to fill.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm curious, is there anything you do around how they share that information back with the team? That's something that my team is always looking at, kind of new or different ways to bring back when someone goes to a conference or kind of is the lead on a certain discipline.
Yeah, we ask that everyone does a blog and does a lunch and learn, and potentially even shares that with our clients, externally in lunch and learns or town halls there, whatever the nomenclature they use is. But what I found is even in things like the Microsoft world, people have been inspired to then do presentations and take part in code camps. There's a Boston code camp and a New Hampshire code camp. So it sort of takes on a life of its own, and they get a little bit competitive because they want to, you know, get external, some folks. And so, in some ways, I think it's sort of set the trajectory of where we're headed with that sort of learning.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's great. Great. It's kind of the double win, right? Getting that knowledge shared internally, but then, right, as a marketer, I can say the fact that you ask people to write blogs and get that content out to clients, that's a big value add
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely.
So, Mark, one of the areas you were talking about around kind of the successfully navigating change is how you kind of get feedback from the teams. I wanted to hear a little bit, kind of how do you collect that? How do you digest it? Wanted to hear a little bit more from you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess sort of the biggest change is really cultural change that we try to model the right behaviors in action. And so, in terms of gathering feedback, I think having an openness and transparency is important, but also, coaching others to take risks and engage, I think is important culturally so that, they feel comfortable putting themselves in places that I think allow for that growth. And then, the providing the pathway and the plan to sort of evolve and care for the results of that change are pretty important. And so, people skills is a big part of that. I think thinking about actual measurable, reportable, repeatable process, is important as well, so that we can have outcomes that you know we can evolve and change over time. And then, the sustainment of tools and technologies that sort of underpin those things. It's very much like a strategy, but thinking about the experience both for employees and customers, sort of underlines it all. We're trying to be strategic about that change, and um, cultural change doesn't happen overnight. And so, again, coming back to being flexible and evolving over time is critical as the environment, tools, experiences change.
Right, right, for sure. Are there areas you think about this differently for your own company internally compared to kind of when you're working with clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can take more risks internally. Experimentation in the sandbox is a little easier when there's no externalization of that. But I think that allows us to, validate some approaches and feel like we're sharing not just sort of one-off pathways, but more proven techniques and tactics.
Right, right. I can empathize with that. We like to call ourselves our own guinea pigs when we're experimenting with new kind of marketing tools, marketing tactics. Certainly done that many times, and then feel comfortable enough to bring it to clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting. I was on a conversation recently with another CEO about the topic of feedback, and through change, there's listening to the people that understand your vision and kind of come along for the ride, and then but also how you listen to the naysayers and what they bring up, and sometimes that can be the most valuable areas to really kind of think about and navigate. I'm curious if there's any kind of different kind of personas or profiles that, as you think about kind of that feedback, any that you pay kind of more attention to.
I think the latter that you attributed value to is probably more important to me than the former, because I would say I fall more in the former. And so being open to the other perspective, I like to think that I'm sort of a half full person. We have a funny benchmark among our CTO, CDO, and myself that I'm the cup runneth over, our CTO's half empty, and our CDO says we need a smaller cup. Just that perspective alone is sort of I think the trilogy of types of perspectives we engage with, and all three have value.
For sure, for sure. I like that. You got all the different personas covered, and together you make that ideal team.
Yeah.
Um, so Mark, this is great. I wanted to talk a little bit more about an example of yours. So can you talk about, what would you say is the biggest change that you've driven in an organization?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's sort of a salient topic of the day. The idea of envisioning the role of data in an organization is sort of top of mind for a lot of organizations, teams, and people today. And we're kind of, at the top of the hype curve, since we're talking about generative AI, but data generally, I think generative AI has sort of catapulted data into the conversation everywhere. And, I'm always cautious to help people think through that, because I believe there's a lot of education to be done there. I also think that companies are coming off of that hype curve and realizing that there's real planning and governance that's needed. There's an operating model for data and analytics that's required, reference architecture, security, sustainability. And so, this idea that you can sort of leap in is something that I try to be careful of. And specific to GAI, the brainstorming side of that change is exciting and fun. At some point, you need to validate that and make sure that you're not having hallucinations, or it's not, the models are valid and the data you're getting back is accurate. And so, I try to help people think about it, particularly in that case, brainstorming with one AI and probably validation or validation with other people on the team to make sure that they're getting the right results. So I would
Yeah,
say, as a kind of broad topic, I would just say that data awareness and engagement is probably the change we're most engaged in.
sure. And how do you advise companies to do that? Is there kind of a process or kind of uh, framework that you guide clients through?
Yeah, I would like every consultancy, we have a model. It's called DARE, and we've added a vision module to our discovery and assessment, road mapping, and execution. But I think a lot of companies are trying to make sense of what the prioritization is and what they can do, 1, 2, 3 things that have impact that's measurable. And so we're spending a lot of time upstream of sort of the DARE methodology doing envisioning. And that's led to some good outcomes, I think, for companies that want to take ownership of some of these things internally.
That's great. That's great. Are there any client examples that are most kind of memorable or most impactful that stand out to you?
That one I was alluding to this morning with the marketer, we actually went over by about 40 minutes because it was sort of a pig piling of ideas on top of things. But, there was a really exciting, I think, outcome there of, the marketing use case for a lot of folks is thought leadership, and reusability of assets like your blog or insights assets. And, the idea of generative AI being able to take a piece of content and write it for a different audience was kind of an interesting idea that we explored. And thinking about even the layering in of data, there's some geographic preferences to the use cases we were looking at that I think you then have to take that offline and validate some of that data. So going a little bit down the rat hole, but I think those types of things where they get tangible are exciting, but the pattern is, both brainstorming and validation are critically important and making it relevant to the particular industry.
Right, right, for sure. I can definitely empathize with that use case on the marketing side. That's been where, as you might imagine, my team has been spending a lot of our time focused, and it's interesting in that right, the thought leadership can't come from generative AI, but what you can do with your thought leadership, and then how you can kind of repackage that and uh, repurpose it into different formats. There's tons of opportunity and innovation happening there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about a major change like this, and using your data as an example, can how do you think about the different roles in an organization that are involved? How do you kind of advise around doing it right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the importance is not to do it in silos, right? So I think there's some overarching goals that have to be looked at, some KPIs, and then you need to think about bringing the group together transparently. How to, it could be an executive team that's learning. It could be cross-departmental teams that don't have a shared understanding of, what other folks are engaged in or considering. And so, not to kind of beat the drum on transparency, but sort of rolling up the sleeves as a team and going through the exercise of, um, understanding, what the dependencies are, where people may have advanced farther than others, and where there might have been some early successes, are important. But I think, bringing people together with some governance around what's possible, what complies with things like security, and we're dealing with some things today that, involve systems that crash and may be, um, at risk. And so I just think that the openness of the communication, the prioritization of those things, doing some experimentation is critical. And then, you know, this sort of idea of a hub and spoke model where successes are there, evangelizing those so other people see that, and can then kind of learn and evolve from there. But um, I think those are the approaches we take to the communication sides.
Sure, sure, makes sense. I'm not sure if you're alluding to the IT outage that folks experienced this
Yes.
morning and overnight. Yeah, a lot happening there. I was in a couple of conversations this morning of someone that couldn't fly out, another couldn't get into their company laptop. So certainly a lot of disruption there.
Yeah, we had a client that had disruption this morning. Fortunately, they've been able to cure that, but definitely some problems.
Right. It's a reminder of how reliant we are on technology for really everything.
Absolutely.
So, Mark, can you talk a little bit about, thinking about your business? What is the biggest challenge or priority that you personally are focused on this year outside of kind of the team overall? But what are you working on?
Yeah, I mean, we're a people business, and so I spend a lot of time thinking about wellness and people care. There's a lot of talk about burnout. Particularly, we started as a remote company 2 years before COVID, not because we had a premonition about COVID to come, but I thought it was a better way to have work-life balance, without the commute, and being able to really think about benefits that people are interested in and would find unique and valuable. And so, I think that's my priority, is to make sure, one, I understand what's important to people that are cross-generational, and try to create an environment. I'm trying to build the company I always wanted to work for. I think it's my responsibility to make sure it's the company that others want to work for. And so people care and well-being is a big one for me. What I think, I'm not going to be so keen to do the go-karts or the escape room anymore, but there are people that still like to do those kinds of activities. The nice dinner is also a great thing, but even just things like flexibility of time and, people have elder parents to care for. Certainly during COVID, people had young kids that they had to, take through lessons and academic types of responsibility. So again, just kind of return to the baseline. People care is probably the number one thing that I obsess about most. And then owning and evolving sort of the direction we're going with things on the current side where, data engineering is a priority. I'm taking that quantum class. really because I think that's the next big technology shift ahead.
Yeah. And hearing a little bit more about the people care, how do you do that? Like, how are you spending your time kind of working on that and knowing that you're kind of going in the direction that will achieve your goals?
Yeah, I think surveys of people to hear it in their own voice of what's important to them is critical. I do regular check-ins with people on the team across all teams to make sure I'm getting some qualitative feedback from folks. And then I ask them to prioritize what's most important to them. So we're doing an offsite in September. One of the three topics is wellness and employee care. So we'll bring a lot of what's been learned to that meeting so that we can collectively decide what the 2 or 3 things we can actually get done are in the next 6 months. And then cataloging those things. And when we repeat that every 6 months, allow them to really be the prioritization of what happens next. So I think that's the right way to do things.
Sounds like a great atmosphere.
Yeah.
The other area, Mark, that you brought up was kind of owning kind of how you evolve the direction and the vision for the company. Can you talk a little bit about how you go about that, and with so much happening in technology, how are you choosing and deciding kind of where to place your bets?
Yeah. I think there's, it's a lot like an annual review. I think we do our own diligence, call it desk research and qualitative conversations and sort of gathering from people that are having industry conversations. We go external, look to third party research organizations and people that sort of have their pulse on trends and technologies. We certainly do actively engage with our customers to find out what their priorities are. And then, the internal temperature matters too. Where do people want to go? What are they going to be passionate about working on? Does that all align? And that informs a lot of our forward hiring. And so kind of taking that 360 review of internal, external, and people, to really validate what those directions will be relative to things like digital transformation. It's pretty obvious, I think, right now for us, but being able to go validate those patterns and directions that we're headed, so that we can create actionable, measurable, reportable, repeatable processes to solve those problems is how we go about developing that strategy every year.
Yep. Yep. I'm curious in your vision, how far out do you look? I was talking with someone recently that, we were saying we used to do kind of 5 years, 10 years, but now even 3 years feels like a long horizon. So curious how you think about that.
Yeah, I kind of break it into 12 and 24 months. I think the durability of things beyond that needs to be revalidated sometimes, not necessarily our underlying process that we fall back on, or our methodology of consulting, but ensuring that we're in touch with, the ever evolving technology. The best example, you can go back to generative AI again. There are hundreds of them, thousands of them. Many will collapse. Those that are strongest, I think, will sort of aggregate into larger organizations. And those things we are validating all the time, right? We don't want to just push people into technologies and trends that are going to decay and wash away. So being focused on enterprise organizations, we're trying to create things that are sustainable and have longevity. So yeah, I would say a 12 to 24 month horizon is a long way in terms of our space.
Yeah. Yeah. So Mark, would love to, shift gears a little bit and hear a little bit more about you and your background and how you got to where you are. So can you tell me, who is Mark Hewitt? How did you go from kind of Mark as a kid to where you are today?
Yeah, no, I grew up in New England, in Texas for a while. I went to West Point, as you mentioned. I was a cavalry officer in the Army. When I came back from the military, I ended up at a material handling and systems automation company, which was a great experience, doing electrical and mechanical contract assembly, doing simulations using CAD CAM libraries that I had to build because they didn't exist off the shelves. That company vertically integrated a warehouse management company, and we started doing real-time looks through the web for disparate manufacturing processes and bringing those things together to create holistic products. And right about that time, I happened to be in Michigan for that job. Friends of mine were coming out of school in Boston and said, "You got to get back here. This web thing's happening." And that's when I came back to Boston and have been in consulting companies ever since. I worked kind of through the web phase of things at a company that built Fidelity.com and Staples.com, a lot of first generation websites. Back then, they put candy and oatmeal and oranges and apples in the, it took the candy out, put the good stuff in. So we go in for free breakfast and paid for dinner after 7 p.m. So all we wanted to do was be at work. But it kind of grew through that web period, was also at a consultancy during the mobile multi-channel sort of period of time. And, now say, that we're kind of modernizing a lot of the things we did in those first two generations. And so, EQ was, as I mentioned, created as a remote first company, largely because that's what I think people want. They want the flexibility to be able to be remote. And also, our job now is to make sure we're together so we can have that high speed collaboration when needed. And so that happens a lot in our case on client site. But it's exciting. I'm still energized. I have a lot of gas left in the tank, I think, for what still lies ahead. And as I look ahead, there's no absence of change as it relates to digital. And so, I get up every morning pretty excited at 4:00 and come down and launch a piece of content that I think hopefully resonates with people's pain points.
That's great. That's great. Sound like an early riser. I thought I was early, but not for. Mark, interested to hear, given all of your experience in consulting companies, given where things are today, do you feel there's been changes to how consulting services are delivered, how consulting is done these days, or where it's headed compared to earlier in your career?
Yeah. So, we're again sort of evolved from a technical consultancy building applications to a strategic digital consultancy. And I've been at several companies that have gone through that change where you're sort of moving upstream to offer best practice tactics and techniques as an output to a strategic offering to then go into implementation. I think the difference now, and really, I think that the key differentiator for the team that we have at EQ is I think you have to be a leader practitioner or you're going to get stale. And so, everyone on our team is a practitioner in their discipline, even if they're in charge of the project or they're in charge of the data architecture or the software architecture. And that's what I think is important. And I think that's what's changed, because as we just spoke about, the speed of change is so quick, happening so quickly that, you do get stale. If you're not evolving with the software or the experience that's required or the agile process that's needed, and the tools and the techniques, you become a dinosaur very quickly. And so I think that's the uniqueness that people require from consultancies today, is they have something that can help the organization from an efficiency, time to onboarding, time to value sort of metrics.
Of course.
Yeah.
And do you see, how do you see that impacting the client? So as you think about, the clients don't always have the same purview across sort of multiple organizations, multiple industries. How do you look at the value that brings?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a firm believer that, Satya Nadella used the model coach care idea where, I believe in consulting, in particular our strategic digital consulting, that companies know their business best, but being able to come in with what is established best practice and roll up your sleeves and work together. I call it experience how we think, and we want to experience how our client thinks. And so bringing those two things together on the ground in modeling the right behaviors and coaching into these tactics, techniques, and best practices, and then providing them the outcomes that they can take and evolve and care for, I think is what's required and frankly, what's most valuable. And so, I really truly believe that the idea of a practitioner leader is really the secret sauce, but it's something that requires effort and continual learning.
Sure. Do you ever see a conflict where someone might be stronger in one and not in the other? And kind of does that factor into kind of, hiring process or skills development? How do you think about that?
Yeah, so we're in the middle of redoing our career ladder, and it very much is part of it. Some people want to just go deep and horizontal. Others want to become people managers. Others, the third spoke is really evolving your understanding of industry, and just maybe discipline, best practice, and being consulting oriented. And so I think you have to make affordance for those things. And to pull a military analogy back, employing people in accordance with their capabilities is critically important, right? Some people have huge value in going deep, and others have value in evolving into the soft skills and the leadership characteristics that are required to galvanize people and lead projects and discussions externally and take care of clients. And so I think all those things kind of play into it. And we definitely, as I mentioned, people care is the biggest priority for me. And so that's a huge dimension of where I spend time to make sure we're getting it right.
I can certainly empathize with that with our own business, right? For our team, it's specialization can go deeper into the industries that we serve, uh, greater understanding of kind of marketing as a function and growth enabler, specialization of individual domains within marketing, and then the client care and kind of building that kind of true listening and anticipation of needs and forward thinking and all of that. And it's a lot to ask of any one person, but it is kind of necessary, I think, when you're working with clients in that way.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah. You brought up the military analogy. I'm curious, from your background in the military, are there other areas that have stuck with you through your career and kind of shaped who you are as a leader today?
I think there's a level of discipline. Unfortunately, I think I wake up early, which is a good thing. But there are sprinklings of some of those takeaways. I've hired a couple veterans in the course of EQ as well. And so, we try to incorporate little things. We call it the bluff, the bottom line up front. So we all have, an objective in mind. Um, Keep it stupid, simple, kiss things so that, people can grasp the concept. Um, a lot of the, there's a lot of portability of the organizational aspect of it and helping teams, become more productive and frankly, making things actionable and repeatable. And so, yeah, there's pieces of that. I don't think the coarseness or the, you know, overly, overly disciplined piece of it is all that pervasive in our culture, but it's definitely organized. Everybody's 5 minutes early for meetings. We try to, provide some rigor to just how we operate.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
And, that's a great segue into my next question for you. And really thinking about, what advice would you give your younger self in your first ever leadership role?
Yeah. Not to be phrase focused, but the idea of intent counting more than technique is something I'd probably remind myself to sort of hold true. I think back then I was someone who was really values based and still am, and had high standards for myself and others that I collaborated with. And so, I think I tell myself that the course ahead is going to be fine. Stay true to those sort of ways in which you operate and the things that you hold dear as a set of values. I think I'd also say that, I've been very focused on network. We come from a similar tree that's very trusted, and I think been good to both of us in that way. I would say focus on network, and for me that means investing in others without a goal or reciprocity. I think that over the course of the last 30 years has been really a great thing. It comes back to you in unusual ways. My grandmother used to say, "Show me your friends and I'll tell you who you are." I think if I were looking back on my younger self, I'd say, have an authenticity to the way you present yourself online and offline, marry those identities and have it be truthful and authentic, but also transparent, and just be yourself. I think, that's the only way to operate today. And in a world where you're infinitely discoverable, and frankly, we move on and offline pretty regularly. You and I haven't seen each other for years, but we've had several interactions through LinkedIn and other channels. But it's authentic, right? The portrayal of who you are is an important thing. And so I would just encourage myself to sort of hold true to the basics of values and standards, and I think the rest will take care of itself.
That makes a lot of sense. Can you talk a little bit about that online presence and kind of what that looks like for you? What kind of standards or approaches do you try to hold yourself to with your presence?
Yeah, I mean, through the lens of sort of where I am currently, it's really focusing in on the problems I hear and sharing best practice advice. But, little things like on LinkedIn, having a current picture. I make a point to take a new picture every year because I'm becoming a gray haired consultant, not the young person anymore. And um, sort of revisiting the way you just, everybody knows more like a channel like LinkedIn that you are the one that's writing your bio. And so updating that and keeping the currency of that's important. I regularly, every time I meet someone, I just met a new stakeholder today, send a connection request out after I'd had the experience of the introduction. And so, making things part of practice in the way you move fluidly between on and offline identity is critical. For a younger person, I would say when you have a role, make sure you create an overview of what you've accomplished, because in large part, that's how you're going to be discoverable. Make it real, because everyone has a back channel to do references. But a lot of those things are critical, and to get them right early on and make them pervasive as you get older. Um, Moving from channel to channel is also interesting. I used to have a site called BB where I thought was somewhere between Twitter and LinkedIn. I've got some other channels that, you get picked up by different areas of the world, or potential outlets for owned and earned media by unifying those identities. And so, yes, I think that it's really about the authenticity of whatever channels you're in, and also being safe, right? Your pictures on Facebook, and, learn the privacy and security aspects of it. So you're permissioning people into your networks that are maybe more on the personal rather than professional side.
Right, right. Certainly a lot to unpack there. I think you do a great job with it. So I'm curious on the channels. You said you're on multiple channels. Like, which ones are you on? Which do you prioritize, where you're kind of spending your time and kind of turning those kind of problems in the industry into kind of advice?
Yeah, largely in today's sort of focus, it's LinkedIn for me. I mean, I have Twitter and Facebook, and I'm part of a bunch of private groups in technology that are sort of invite groups, that are sort of, sub communities. So, for me, I think the right way to go about sharing um, what we do is through the lens of solving problems for customers, putting that in the right groups on LinkedIn. I do share it with, you know, other communities that I'm involved in as well. But um, I'm a big believer that, if people feel value in the content you're putting in, even within your organization, they'll become advocates of that, share with their network. And that effect has been, you know, pretty, pretty impactful, I think, for the level of effort that's put in. The impact is big.
Yeah, great. Do you have any advice for folks that want to get themselves out there in that way? I know a lot of CEOs certainly have the expertise, but often, despite the best intentions, aren't always putting out the kind of content and thought leadership that they're looking to. So, could you share maybe what works for you?
Yeah. Well, I had a company called Socially Savvy that EQ acquired, that was about helping people to activate, it was about activating and optimizing your identities, your digital identities, growing and deepening your network, becoming an authentic, original content creator using video and written content initially, and then putting that into practice. So really being methodical about developing audience authority, reputation, and influence. And it changes. It's not when you're just looking for a job. It's when you're trying to establish yourself in a new role in an organization and be a good corporate citizen, to advocate on behalf of the brand that you're working with. And, my belief is that the employees are the best voice of and most trusted voice of the company. And so I think teaching people those skills and then helping them, which is sort of the fifth module that we use at EQ, of making it part of practice, right? Everybody does that differently. I happen to have LinkedIn open all day long. People that know me know that I'm going to be seeing the message on LinkedIn. If they send me a note there, oftentimes my communications start there and then evolve to either phone or, my work email at some point. But, those are valuable things to learn and to have the trust of people that they allow you and permission you into the way that they communicate fluidly throughout the day. So not to over-index on socially savvy, but my belief was those 5 things are how you sort of develop muscle memory to leverage, on and offline channels.
Yep. That's great advice. And I think that can be very helpful to others, especially, our personal brands as a way of getting our company's name out there, getting the expertise out there is so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Mark, as we wrap up today's conversation, can you tell our listeners how they can reach you?
Sure. As I mentioned, I think LinkedIn is a great way to connect and have direct reach with individuals. And certainly you can reach out to me at mark@eqengineer.com if you want to send a note.
Great. Thank you. Really appreciate having you on the podcast with us today.
It's great to see you again.
You too. And thank you to everyone listening. I know I loved hearing about what Mark shared, both on terms of the digital transformation and some of the topics around generative AI, and where we just concluded as far as getting your brand out there and some of the thought leadership tips. And so if today's episode gave you any valuable insights, and I'm sure it did, please share it with someone. Spreading this kind of knowledge and information really helps all of us grow as leaders and equips us to drive successful transformation in our organizations. So thanks again, Mark. And this has been another fantastic episode of Shift and Thrive. See you all next time.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thanks, Mark. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.